Hello, welcome to the 6th episode of Take Me Back the Interviews. And I'm very excited today. We have a guest that I'm dying to talk to. I'm not going to tell you who she is yet until I kind of set it up for you. I'm going to start with an old photograph. I think Tony's going to get it on the wide shot. And then I'm going to move it toward my camera so he can zero in a little bit. Now, my husband is Thomas Mehuron II, and my youngest son, my third son, is Thomas Mehuron III. And this fella is the original Thomas Mehuron, the first. He's my husband's great-grandfather. And when I researched him, I thought it was so interesting that there was way more information about his beautiful young wife. He was 34 when they married, and she was 22. And just a firecracker from all accounts that I have found. And her name was Julia Folsom. And you probably recognize the name Folsom, another of our historic families with deep, deep roots in this valley. I did want to show you one other thing that I unearthed, though, because it's really cool. For Thomas and Julia. This came out of Tommy's Aunt Ruth's house. And it is their marriage license. Look at that.
Sweet.
1902, just at the turn of the century, the whole world changing, and the two of them got together and got married and started a family. So, the big reveal. The guest we have today is a Folsom. Her name is Pat Folsom, and I'm dying to compare notes with you.
Be fun.
So, Pat, let's frame like your existence in this valley up a little bit. You were born here?
Yes.
And when you were born, were you living on a farm?
Yes. My father, Wendell, or Ike Folsom, as most people know him, was the youngest child of Charles and Mary Boyce married Charles Kellogg Folsom. And they had a farm which is across from the Bundy Road for people that live in the valley now.
Okay.
And the house is still there, but they had about 100 acres. And that included the area where Mad Bush was, and now they're recreating it into, I can't remember the name of it, but it's just before you get to the Bundy Road.
Where the old Egan's was. And
yes. And it was Mad
it.
Bush originally. My dad sold that land to Tony Hyde when Sugar Bush was just coming into the valley.
Yeah.
And it also included the Yestermorrow land. We used to hay that land. And my grandfather had a few cows, a couple of horses. He did a little sugaring. My grandmother raised hens and sold eggs and butter. And I spent a lot of time down there. So that my father had come back in the early 40s, end of Depression, the bank was going to foreclose. He came back to save the farm, essentially. And all the other kids were married and off raising their own families. So he came home, and I think my grandparents weren't happy that he came home with a wife. But he and my mom were married, and
your mother was?
Her name was Gertrude Burbank Folsom, or everybody called her Trudy.
I knew Trudy. I knew her. My third pregnancy was in my middle 30s, so that was considered high risk.
Mm-hmm.
And she was coming back from really fighting hard with her arthritis.
Yes.
So we would often meet because it was so pleasant to work out and talk to her, we'd often meet at the old Maximum Fitness.
Oh.
So I didn't know her as an elder or the mother of a friend. I knew her as a friend.
Mm-hmm.
And
Great.
she was just a fantastic woman as far as I'm concerned.
Yes.
So
I would agree.
Where did she come from?
She came from Chelsea, Vermont.
Okay.
And she and my dad met at the Mount Philo Inn. She was the milkmaid. It was like a summer job in college. She worked at the Mount Philo Inn, and one of her jobs was to go to the milk house and get cream and milk for the guests in the inn. And he was a milk tester. And so he would come once a month and test the milk, and there are, chemical tests that you do, and that's how they met in the milk house at Mount Philo.
They spent enough time together. They fell in love.
Yes. She would joke that he would sometimes come to pick her up with a whole carload of girls. So she was just one of many, but she won out, yes.
He must have been a very charming man.
I guess so. He had lots of curls and a good sense of humor, I think. And
So if you could just take a minute to indulge me, because one of the things I wanted to accomplish today is to figure out how you are related to my husband, Tom.
Okay. Well,
I've got this.
I know that.
You know all the names? Oh, you already know the answer. You're way ahead of me.
I do, but I will look at this. So my great-grandfather, George Weymouth Folsom, lived down in the house that used to be right on the road. There was a house and a barn at the corner of North Fayston Road and Route 100. The house was moved back many years ago, several years ago. But he had 13 children. Mm-hmm. And my grandfather, Charles Kellogg, was kind of in the middle of that batch of kids.
Of children.
Yes. And I don't know. Okay, so Julia, so Charles was older than Julia, and Daniel was in between the two of them. Now, I noticed that there's no death date for Daniel, so I'm not sure maybe he died in infancy. I didn't know that Julia was then the next one younger. Or maybe it's just that there were no other, because of the date of this book, there are no other married, died, etc. Dates in here. But
Julia was born in, what date does it give?
1880.
1880.
And Charles was
married
born
in 1902.
1876, which I always thought was, it's 100 years after we became a country kind of thing.
That is kind of cool.
Yeah. So,
and I have a question. In researching, I did this book for when Mehuron celebrated its 75th. I took Aunt Ruth's notes pretty much and her photographs and just poured through them and tried to understand the various relationships. I love this picture of the original Tom Mehuron with his twin horses, Joe and Dan Patch. Joe Patch and Dan Patch. They were twins. I don't know why. I'm just taking them.
It's interesting that they have last names.
Isn't it?
Because usually I can remember my grandfather's horse, Nancy, and
So the thing I kept coming up against, though, as I said, was that it was Julia who did the kind of work that drew attention, important attention. She has a picnic going on here to raise money, for example, on their farm on the North Road. She taught in 2 different schools here in the Valley. And that's a question I have. Was education and being a teacher part of the Folsom way?
I think so. I'm looking here to see if there was a Mary Jane Folsom that she taught for 60 years. And I guess she maybe was one of my grandfather's aunts rather than, it certainly wasn't a sibling because the timing wouldn't have been right. But she was a very famous teacher. And when I was doing some research with my mother, I found many teachers in the family. There was actually, this is the Daniel. I'm thinking. Perhaps there's a cemetery in North Fayston that has many Boyces in it. So
the one that's
up on the hill
has the Levan is there too at the
think
top. We were just there for a memorial. Yeah. It
Yes,
has the
okay.
Folsom Gate.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, and that's really what started my mom and I doing research into the genealogy, because in the early 80s, a tree fell on the fence that was around that gate and broke part of the fence. So my parents took the fence down, and I have part of it up at the house that Dad built, and they left just the gate. But it was quite ornate, and we thought it was quite interesting to have that all around. You know, it just seemed interesting.
To my perspective, I got chills when I went up to see if a Mehuron was on the Civil War monument, and there was.
Okay.
Right? Thomas's dad served in the Civil War. And just in the same line of vision is the Folsom Gate.
Right.
Almost as if it foreshadows the marriage.
Oh.
To me.
Yeah. Interesting.
So the Boyces, now, were they the Boyces of Boyce Hill, which is such a wonderful resource for our community?
Yes, actually. My grandmother Folsom was Mary Boyce Folsom. And she grew up in North Fayston. She was about 13 years younger than my grandfather. I guess that's sort of the way things were for a while. And she grew up in 2 locations that I know of. One, a house on Sharpshooter Road.
Oh boy, that's way up there.
Yeah. And then when she was 7 or 8, her parents moved down to where their parents had been, which is right across from the schoolhouse. You know, you make that sharp turn, the schoolhouse where, what's her name that lives there, the artist that lives there.
Dorothy.
Dorothy, yes. So she lives in what was the old schoolhouse, and on the other side of the road was the house where my grandparents grew up. But they had come to North Fayston in the early 1800s, like 1806 or something like that. And actually, I joke because I'm a double Boyce and a double Folsom.
Yeah.
But cousins married, and I haven't looked to see if they were, 3rd, 4th, 5th cousins. But they came from Rhode Island early, and there were 2 different strands of the Folsoms, of the Boyces, and one of those Boyces was up on Boyce Hill. Mm-hmm. The other one was in that section where, kind of Center Fayston and North Fayston kind of come together. And then there's a road, Big Basin Road or something that goes straight out. Yeah.
Because I
right
walk
on that corner.
that loop often. Just random comment on double cousins. Had to figure out one day, not too long ago, what are the genetics like with double cousins? And you know, it's as close as a half sibling. So you got a lot of the same genes, which must have made for interesting relationships.
Well, you know, in this little valley in Vermont in the 1800s, you know, and I don't know what the laws were. I know first cousins couldn't marry, but I think second cousins I don't know. But the James Peck Boyce married Mary Boyce, and so they were cousins. And we can figure it out if you want to. But James Peck was very famous for being a bear hunter.
Really?
And my mother wrote a story in the 80s, kind of imagining why he became a bear hunter and things like that. But he hunted bears all his life, and the story is that he shot his last bear when he was 90.
Really? Where? Do you know where he was?
Up in North Basin somewhere,
Oh my
I think.
gosh.
And then the other story is that when he was a young man and he was out hunting bears, he trapped a bear in a cave up at the top of Burnt Rock.
Burnt Rock.
And he tried to smoke it out of its den or the cave or whatever, and set the whole top of the mountain on fire, and that's why it's Burnt Rock.
Now, I have heard this story told. Now, not everybody is part of the family. You understand the real story. Story has been like blown up and twisted and changed. So it's really interesting to know who actually did that fire.
Well, that's what we surmise, and I don't pretend to be any expert on, what actually happened, and it may be legend, I don't know, but that's the story that's come down through the ages.
Fascinating.
So Mom wrote a story about it, and it's in one of the Waitsfield Telecom books, when they do the...
Is it in an insert?
Yeah, it was an insert several years ago, many years ago.
Oh, I'll see if they're not all online.
I think that one is.
I think I'll search that out. I wish I'd known, I didn't start writing till I was 60. And I'm 68 now. I didn't know your mother was a writer. I wish we both knew that at the time that we were seeing each other a lot.
Well, she wouldn't have called herself a writer, but she did, I think, really wanted to do this family project just as something to leave to the family.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Can we just open it and have you comment on what she did, how she set it up?
Sure.
It would be very, I think, difficult for the viewer to see it, really. So we'll just have to go by comments.
Yes. And actually, I have my grandson scanned it all. So it's all in a Google a document. It's too big to be I'm not a technical person. You can't, it's too big it has to be a Google Doc. It's too big for whatever
Microsoft
he tried.
Word.
Yeah.
But that's okay. We can, when I say I want to start collecting these things to do the digital museum, this is a perfect thing, and we can work around that. Probably Dropbox.
Oh, well, you would know more than I. But anyway, so she and I did a lot of research. We did a backwards genealogy trip, so we went from here to Tunbridge, Vermont, which is where the connection between her ancestor and my dad's ancestor, her grandmother was a Folsom.
Right.
And so they were fifth cousins or something like that. So she just put lots and lots of pictures in that she found, or I went to England and
Did you?
and went to Foulsham, England, and we went to, there's a Folsom reunion every year. I don't know if you know that there's a whole Folsom group that gets together from all over the country, and
Where do they meet?
They meet at different places, and there's a whole committee that gets together, and
That's very cool.
so they were in Burlington one year, but they were in Hingham, Mass one year, which is where the Folsoms first came for a few years before they got.
I remember that going
Yeah.
over the material in the book this morning.
Yeah, they came to Hingham, Mass. John Folsom had married Mary Gilman, and they came with her parents in 1638. They stayed in Hingham for a while, and so my family, my mom and dad, and then husband, went to one of the reunions in Hingham, Mass that they had. And then they moved to Exeter, New Hampshire, because there was some, they didn't like the religion, I'm not really sure, but there were some restrictions in Hingham that they didn't really like. So then they were in Exeter for many generations.
Creeping their way to Vermont.
Exeter, then Epping, New Hampshire. Then they went to Gilmanton, thinking they were going to have a new start there several generations later. They didn't like Gilmanton. It was too cold. It wasn't, and I think they were still afraid of Indians at that time. So
What year would that have been?
late 1700s, early 1800s,
Right.
something like that. And then came, one of them came to the valley, John Folsom, and then George Weymouth with all those kids, including Julia and Charles, whatever. So anyway, here's the. Yep, this is how many Folsoms were in. So it was 1984.
We're looking
we
at
all
a
went to
page,
Hingham.
We're looking at a page, a photograph taken in 1984, and it's a Folsom reunion, and I can't even begin to guess how many people are here. A lot.
I think, yeah, a couple hundred.
Yep.
Anyway, and it's just very, very interesting, and the Folsom genealogies are very interesting. That's. This is the first volume, but I've got 4 volumes that are, this is maybe one of the smallest volumes.
This is the family book. Look how many pages, that's got to be over that. It's like 550 pages.
And there are 4 of them. So most of it, you can see all those little tags in there. That's, that's our side of the family.
That is amazing. Thank
so
you for
I'll be glad to, share more of those. I just couldn't bring all 4 of them plus this stuff.
Right.
So yeah. So then, Mom wrote it all, and so in the early days, I put it all on the computer. So that's my contribution. And this first stuff is about Hingham and then I don't know. She found lots of different things that she wanted to have photocopied, and lots of pictures. So she's got.
You just
here's
flip by a deed of Daniel's. Handwritten deed.
Okay.
That's cool. And who are we looking at now? We've got 2
This is
photographs
Mary
here.
Jane. This is the famous school teacher who taught. She says 1833 to 1910, but she's the one that taught for so many years. And the story on her, or what we gathered on her, was that she was teaching when the Civil War started. And we believe that she was in South Carolina tutoring. What's the name? And there's a hall in Waterbury that's dedicated to a lawyer that was. His family was growing up in Waterbury. We believe that she was maybe tutoring his children in South Carolina, and the story is, and I'm sure it's just a story, I can't verify it, but that when the Civil War broke out, she sewed her pay for her tutoring into the bottom of her petticoat and got on a train and came north. But that was so that her coins wouldn't be stolen.
Right. She wouldn't be robbed.
Yeah,
We're going to have, do you know Alice Evans by any chance?
I do. I know Alice well.
So Alice is going to be on in a few weeks, closer to her book launch.
Yes, absolutely.
So
yeah.
she's has, for folks that don't know her, she travels all over the country, finding the soldiers from the valley and
Yes.
doing deep research. And she's written a book about it. And so I'll ask her. I saw some statistic. Just Fayston was the only statistic. What the population was and how many of people went to war. Mm-hmm. And that's not even counting someone like that who,
Right.
the employer was in the war, right? And she went to help out the family. So we don't even have those numbers, but just the soldiers, it is mind-blowing to me how many went.
Yeah.
We have one in our family too, and we have medals and documents and so forth.
Oh, good.
In fact, that's how the Mehuron name changed. It used to be Mehuron, Mahurin.
Oh.
It's Scotch-Irish.
Okay.
But him negotiating the war and all the documents, they changed his name.
Ah. Okay. I didn't know that.
That's why no one can pronounce it.
Mehurons, there's no problem.
Well, they just did a big radio show.
I know, I saw it.
And if you look at this book, that's the beginning, is how do you pronounce it? Because every day of my life, people don't know. So I'm curious, you've got all these generations, you've got it all documented beautifully. I'm thinking about, so Trudy marries your dad, she comes to the valley. Mm-hmm. Where did they live at first?
They lived with my grandparents. So right across from the Bundy Road, there's a house sitting there.
It's kind of a tall,
yes,
two-story.
And it was much bigger when I was little. There was a porch all the way around the house. There, in the olden days, there was one of those covered walkways that connected the house to the big barn. I can remember helping with hay and getting hay into that big barn, and it had one of those drove up into the barn, and my grandpa would milk the cows in the lower part. He didn't. I know from from history that my dad put in running water and electricity when he came back to take care of the farm. And we lived upstairs for like 2.5 years.
Yeah.
And it was, I know nothing about the finances, and you wouldn't be talking to your baby about money. But
Exactly.
I'm sure that money was a problem. I know that he worked in the woods with his dad some of the time, mm-hmm. and he also, I don't know how
Was he in the
long
woods logging?
Yes.
So that's
yeah.
another way to make money, logging.
Yes,
yeah.
yep. And my grandmother was raising hens and selling eggs and things like that. And it was hard. It was hard making a living. And eventually...
Did they sugar? Did they make?
Yes.
Yeah.
But I think only for themselves. But I can remember going with my grandpa and old Nancy, and he'd say, okay, stay here. And then he'd just leave the horse and go up and get the bucket of sap and stuff. And I can remember being worried about, is she just going to stand here, or am I going to be in trouble? But I was really little
So
then.
where would you be? The horse was it like a little carriage or
No,
a
there was
sled?
a sled on the back with a big tank that he would pour the sap into, and they never had a sugar house, so they came back and they had an arch out in the driveway, and they boiled, wood fed. They just boiled. It was a small operation for sugaring, but they made enough for the family.
And did you have cattle?
Um,
Do we call them cattle, or are they just cows?
Grandpa had 2 or 3 cows that I remember, so he wasn't milking a whole lot. I think I can remember, how Grandma would leave the milk in a big pail, and then the cream would rise to the top, and she'd skim off the cream to make butter, and how much fun it was to help her make butter and stuff like that.
I've been working on the Take Me Back project for 2 years. And this vignette that you're painting for us right now is what a lot of members of the historic families want me to understand, that the families made a lot. They grew their own food.
Yes.
And these different, whether you're selling eggs or maple syrup or whatever, you had to do a lot of different things.
Absolutely.
To actually have cash money.
Yes.
It wasn't maybe that difficult to have food, even though it was hard work. The cash was another state of affairs.
Right. And it was very difficult. And I think a lot of the kids started working at, 11, 12. They would, like, my dad went and helped Ward Jocelyn with sugaring when he was 12, 13, 14. And they'd go and stay with that family and work and do whatever needed to be done while they were going to school at the same time. And girls would go and maybe help some woman who had lots of kids, help with the housework and stuff like that. It was the way they survived.
If the girls took a job like that, I'm thinking of one of my ancestors. That's why I'm curious about this. Was it a seasonal thing, and then they came home, or did they really leave home at that point?
I think they pretty much left home. Like, that's how my grandfather Burbank in Chelsea, no, not my grandfather, my great-grandfather met his wife. She had come to help the Burbanks with the housekeeping and ended up marrying my great-grandfather.
Now, is the late Bub Burbank, was he related to you?
We think that we're related somehow, but I don't know exactly. I don't know. I haven't done that much on the Burbank side.
Yeah.
I do have a cousin who has done a lot, but I don't know that connection necessarily.
In your research, have you done your DNA?
I have. I haven't done I did the ancestry. It was several years ago, and it was one that just said, "Oh, you're this percentage, most percentage European," and so I really don't know a lot about that. But
So today when you have a match, you hear that little ding, and in my family, it's been sort of amazing. I did my heritage and I did the new ancestry. I did my heritage because there are more Finnish, Scandinavian people. My Nana was driven off her farm. She was an Aboriginal Sami who lived in Sakajärvi, Finland, which the Russians kept trying to take. And they did eventually just change the border. Now it's Russian Karelia. She was 14, she escaped, somehow made it to the United States, but she never saw her family again. The Iron Curtain closed behind. So with the new technology, Finns from because Samis were ethnically cleansed, really. They were just put on the border. But the families are still around, and they can find me.
Oh, great.
And the same thing with the Gallaghers of Donegal. It was a door that opened that hadn't been opened before. So it might be fun for you to do it again.
Yeah. So, I'd like that information. So you said Gallaghers.
Yes. I have a grandmother, Margaret Gallagher, and I've been to Donegal. And you literally cannot throw a rock without hitting a Maggie Gallagher.
Oh, wow.
So there was no way for me to know which family it was until I had a DNA hit.
Interesting.
And it was an extended cousin who reached out to me.
Because there are Gallaghers in the valley.
I do know that. I wrote for the renovation of St. Patrick's. I wrote 4 articles about Paddy Hill and the immigration of the Irish here.
Oh, okay.
I don't know why. I never thought about doing that before, but the story is so interesting to me.
Yeah. So Hattie Gallagher was my grandmother's youngest sister.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Hattie and Harry were twins, and they're both buried right in the cemetery next to Mehuron's. Yeah. So
So the same cemetery where my mother-in-law is. There's voices in there too. I wanted to ask you about that. If I go to Irene's grave,
which is next to
the Irisville, right next to me,
Irisville. Yeah.
There's a McAllister stone, and then you just make a right, and that's where Aurelia and Elmer were buried. Same area.
Okay.
And you just turn around. There's a couple voices there, and I wondered how they wound up in that cemetery.
I'll have to look when I'm over there, because there are Folsoms over there as well. And so my parents were going to be buried there. But then when the whole North Facein thing, we started learning about that, they decided they wanted to be up there rather than down here. So, but my grandparents are there, my grandmother and her grandparents.
That North Facein cemetery is actually just so beautiful.
Mm-hmm. That's where I'm going to be.
Yeah, is it?
I'm on my parents' stone, and then my daughter has a stone right next to me too. So, yeah, I just love it. It's quiet, it's peaceful, the birds sing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, you almost want to, I've been up there several times. I almost think it's a place to go, just go sit and meditate.
Yeah. Yeah, it's lovely.
I'm going to just check the time because...
Oh, do we have a time limit of an hour?
I try to keep it, you're a teacher. We found out, by the way, listeners, that we are both science and math teachers, retired science and math teachers. I taught for 40 years, and how long did you?
Close to 30, and mostly in Colchester, Vermont.
And Pat and I agree, even though we could have taught other grades, that we really like middle school.
Yep. Yeah.
Let me see if it's the same reason. The reason I like middle school is the children are capable of really pretty sophisticated projects and so forth, but they're still children. Mm-hmm. Is that how you feel too?
And they're very interesting people. Yeah, they're fun. You can do things with them like let's go out and clean up this area, and what are we going to find, and
there's still a lot of enthusiasm, I think.
Right.
Whereas the older kids can be a little jaded.
Right, that's exactly the word I would use.
It's more like, how do I get an A? Just tell me what to do.
Fun, yeah.
So, okay, I want to know a little bit more, since time is growing a little bit short. You've shared some things, like I love the image of you being out with the sled, with the sap, and wondering if the horse is going to wander off.
Right.
What's the first? I asked, Fred Messer was here yesterday.
Oh, great.
And I asked him this question because I always remind people, I may have the last name Mehuron, but I am an Irish Catholic Jersey girl. I am from the track houses in New Jersey. I don't know about farm animals. I didn't have, certainly didn't grow up around them.
Yeah.
And I asked Fred, I do know all the families are telling me that the children started doing chores, and the chores were real physical work, and you did it early. So what's your memory of the animals? And maybe even, what did you have to be careful of?
I loved being in the barn with my dad and my grandpa too. Just I think the warmth, the smell of animals. My earliest memory that I have is my dad coming out of the woods and gathering me up in his arms, and we took the horses to Folsom Brook for a drink, and I can just, the smell of the leather and
Did he have you on the saddle with him?
no, he wasn't in the saddle. He was driving them with reins because they had hitched to a sled, or I don't know what exactly. I'm sure he was dragging lumber out of or not lumber, but trees out of the woods or something. But I just have that in my memory. But the smell of the animals and just not being scared. Mm-hmm. A lot of kids, I think, when they come into a barn or they're exposed to a horse or something for the first time, they're a little nervous about these animals. But they were just, if you grow up around them, they're just, just part of the beloved family.
So now you're saying the same thing and when Fred said it yesterday, it really made a light bulb go off. I didn't ever think of that. He said, I knew them, but they knew me. So they knew him from a baby on.
Yes. Yeah.
And, we always have 3 dogs. I do know about dogs. They're interesting little spirits, animals, right?
Right. Yeah. We used to go out I remember going out in the pasture, and all of our cows had names, and you could climb on the back of old Goldie and she'd kind of lumber around. And
was Goldie a horse?
No, one of the cows.
You could climb on the back of a cow? And she wouldn't hurt you?
No.
She'd just put up with it?
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah. What was your favorite animal that you ever had on the farm?
I had a horse. I begged my parents for a horse. I just wanted a horse so bad. And so my father traded some hay for this colt from, I think it was Bob Gove that he got this.
Oh, gosh. I knew Bob, too.
Yeah. And so the colt had not ever been ridden. And so my dad and I, we put bags of grain on each side, and so he'd get used to having people on him and stuff like that. So anyway, that was probably my favorite when I was.
And what was his name?
Flash.
Flash.
And it's interesting because my brother was younger, 2 years younger than I was, and I thought he was the color of Coco. He was a little Morgan. And so my father, so I thought Coco would be a good name. But my brother said, he's really fast. We got to name him Flash.
Such a boy thing, right?
Yeah. So Flash he was.
Tell me the lineup of kids. Who's the oldest?
I'm the oldest. My brother Gordy was 2 years younger. My sister Peg was 6 years younger than I was. Linda was 4 years younger than Peg. And then Robin is 5 years younger than Linda. So there were 2 years between Gordy and myself. And then 4, 4, 4. And then Robin was 5. No, 4, 4. Then Robin was 5.
And does everybody live around here?
Linda and I live in this house that my dad built in the early 60s up on East Warren Road. When he sold the house in the 60s, sold the farm because the milk company that he was selling to went bankrupt, and so
Right.
He just couldn't financially go on anymore. So he sold the cows, and then somebody from Bob Rose, you know that name? Jackie Rose had the store down here.
I knew Jackie for
Yeah,
many years.
yeah. So Bob Rose introduced my dad to this George Skagel, and they had been friends, and George loved to ski, and so he ended up buying the farm, and so the farm was then used as a resort area for Great Lakes Carbon Corporation.
I remember Trudy saying that name.
Yes.
It didn't mean much to me at the time.
Right. So they had a company in New York, and he would bring up his customers. It was a carbon company, so I don't know all the stuff they did, but they had
Right.
they had many products, and he brought up his vice presidents for a weekend of skiing or golf or whatever it was, and also a lot of his vice presidents and things like that would come. So Mom and Dad really they managed the farm, it turned out, and until 86 or something like that, when it was time for them to retire. But yeah, Dad got to be the entertainment director and taught many people to ski and golf and ride snowmobiles and all this kind of stuff. And Mom got to clean and cook, ready for the next
That's
group
not
to
much
come.
of a deal.
Yeah. I don't think she got the
So
good end
this
of the
is
stick.
right at that time that several families have told me about now, when people were losing their farms, when the storage of milk and the transport of it changed.
Yes, and that was another thing. So when Dad started farming up there, the milk was kept in a milk house in cans.
Yeah.
And you've probably heard of Nelson Patch and George Sawyer. They would come around, and part of the way they made their living was to collect milk from all the farmers and then get it to, I don't know, ours went to Boston, and it was called the Whiting Company that bought it. And then, and I don't know when exactly, you had to have a milk tank. And so it went from being cans of milk to this big tank, and then somebody would come in and pipe it from the milk tank into a bulk tank that they would drive off in a truck somewhere. And yeah, a lot of people couldn't do the
upgrade.
No. And we were really, a lot of people struggled. Dad did have a bulk tank and did that as long as he could, but when you're making $2,000 a year and suddenly that money is gone, and you've got a daughter in college and more kids coming up, and I don't know, it breaks my heart that I didn't know the struggles they were going through, but I know they did.
This is something that en masse, like as I look at the research I've done on, again, I call them the historic families to differentiate your experience from somebody like me who came in 1986. I mean, I sort of realized, like, I used to be Mary Kathleen Hyde. I started the Hideaway.
Yep.
And then marrying Tommy. I'm interlaced in the history.
Yep.
But I don't go back far enough to live through all these things.
Right.
So each of these families' experiences, I think about the commitment it took to figure out a way to stay here. Right? I mean, some took very dangerous jobs up at building Mad River Glen. It was steady money, I suppose, as opposed to waiting for the milk check.
Yep.
It was steady money, but it was seasonal. So it was just a trade-off of very difficult farm work to very difficult construction work. Some started businesses. Your parents seemed to to have cut a very nice deal that enabled them to continue to live the life they wanted to live.
Right, right, yeah. I know my dad struggled, didn't really know after he sold the cows, what am I going to do?
Right.
And he was still in his 40s, and he went to work and tried working for Norris Gallagher, his cousin, in building, in construction business. But, sometimes, and Norris eventually had to go out of business because not all of his customers would pay him. And so he got, it was just it was hard. It was hard.
And then to have the large families, too.
Yeah.
I was intrigued by the Jameson family, for example, when they sold their farm, which is now Von Trapp's.
Yes. Yep.
They had, for years, done part-time insurance sales.
Yes. Yep. I remember Malin doing that.
So, they just looked at the resources they had. How are we going to do this?
Right.
And they created a business that went on for generations.
Right. Yep. Yep. My grandmother cleaned houses.
And would this be when Sugarbush and Mad River going?
No, it was earlier, I think, when her kids were little. I remember because she had trained to be a teacher, and there was no high school when she went to school. So she went to Mary Jane Folsom after she got out of 8th grade to go on with her education. And she was smart, and somebody suggested, I don't know if it was a principal or whoever, well, you'd make a good teacher. And I think she taught 1 year. And once I said to her, oh, don't you wish that you could have continued to be a teacher? And she said, I'd rather clean houses than teach kids. So there was that. Oh, okay, Grammy.
Now, I wrote about 2 of the yearbooks. One is Elmer's class of 1923.
Yes, and one was...
It was 1952 that I found, and I was delighted because my beloved mother-in-law was there.
Yeah.
She had come from Massachusetts to teach at the high school.
Yes, I remember that.
Do you?
I remember when she came.
So, and other people now are handing me yearbooks because they know I'm fascinated. I read every word of them. I'm very impressed by the writing. The kids could really write, And so my question to you, did you go to school at the old high school from first?
12 years.
Really?
You came to our alumni banquet last weekend. Weren't you there?
I was. I had a mishap.
Oh, no.
I won't name names. Yeah, I was there. I had actually intended to circle around and talk to everybody because just as you're here today, I'm trying to forge relationships because this is wide-reaching. Like this interview today will be repackaged into the radio show, and then we're hoping to do a podcast and then articles, and it will live on the digital museum. So the more folks I can get, the happier I will be.
Okay.
But something happened. There was somebody there who she wasn't too happy with me for some reason. So
I think I know who that is.
we won't say.
No.
And I actually think she mistook me for somebody else. I don't know, but I didn't want anything to disrupt your beautiful event.
Oh, okay.
You had a lot of people there.
Yeah, there were about between 60 and 70 maybe.
That's amazing.
And the woman who was the oldest graduate from there graduated in 53.
Really?
Yeah. Norma Wimble.
Wimble? Norma. Of course, she's my neighbor.
Oh, okay. Norma Barton Wimble.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. It's finding that volume where I picked it up and I took it home because of Irene. But then I started looking at all the seniors, the juniors and seniors. Mm-hmm. And these were people, when I came and I married Tom, these were people that she would introduce me to who I just thought were friends. I had no idea that they were student and teacher, and they became friends for all those decades.
Right, right. And we used to love having her come to the alumni banquets. It was always
she
so
loved
wonderful.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what was the biggest surprise at the banquet? I mean, I know they gave like awards for who came the farthest and that kind of thing.
Right. You mean surprise as far as
For
who
you
showed
personally,
up?
like maybe there's someone who you weren't expecting.
There are a couple of people who were in, and I didn't have a list of who was coming, so I didn't really know. But there are a couple of people who were in the class before me that I had heard that were very ill.
Yeah.
Actually, one was very ill, and I didn't even know if he was still living. And he lives in Warren, so he's not far away.
Yeah.
But he was there, and I was really thrilled to see him.
That is exciting.
Yeah.
Because we're getting to that age where...
Well, we've been at this. Eleanor Haskins started this alumni banquet thing, I don't even know how many years ago now, 70 years ago? And so I was on the committee for a while, and then I wasn't on the committee anymore, but I would go almost every year, and I would help set up and take down, and so you've talked with Rachel Hartshorn McEwen.
We had the four of them in the
Yes,
studio. We couldn't fit it in this space, so we did it out at the table.
Oh, okay.
And they were very shy about being on TV, so we just recorded it.
Oh.
And Tony put a picture of them with their mother.
Oh, great.
Who
is related to the Boyces.
What I'm discovering, and I can't wait to digitalize all this stuff. How many families have like books, whole books that one or a couple of their family members wrote? And because of this, it surprises me, the commitment to education. It just surprises me. Like, as I say, the writing in those yearbooks is more than college level. And, and they'd have these little twists and turns, like the prophecy section, where they do a little funny thing about what you're going to be like when you're growing up.
Right, right.
They're really well done. So I guess it shouldn't surprise me that family members took the time to write their stories, but I want to share them with the world, right? And students. It adds a lot to Vermont history is embedded, as you know, in our standards. So for local kids to be able to access these papers and photographs and so forth.
Yeah. So I don't know if you know this, but I will tell you, Rachel has all the yearbooks every year. She has all the pictures of every class for all the years.
And she did this just to follow it all?
She has been on the committee. She was the treasurer, but really she was the organizer of this for many, many years. I mean, she supposedly not going to be involved anymore. She's been involved for 25 years.
Yeah.
But she has at her house and they're all in order, and they're all cataloged.
Oh my gosh.
They're wonderful. She's not really sure what to do with them, and she's kind of ready to back away a little bit. But she has them all. All the yearbooks, everything, every year.
I think
at her house.
We're doing pretty well with the fundraising. The books is very close to being sold out.
Well, I know that lots of people have it.
And it's been great. And
good.
Because the artists donated and I donated and the businesses paid for the printing, all that money goes into the nonprofit.
Okay.
So, it sounds like I need to, I hate to spend the money out of there, but maybe spend some of that money and get a really good scanner. Because I could go to Rachel maybe one yearbook at a time and scan it. Put it in a file, goes right up on the digital museum, I keep calling it.
Yeah, I don't know. I know that my grandson, he works at he's a civil engineer in New Hampshire. So he had a good scanner that he had access to, and we just went in and did it.
Yeah.
So, there might be somebody that would volunteer to have that done, or for
I could put
I
out
don't know.
some calls maybe.
whatever.
But it's a big commitment of time, right?
Oh, yeah.
So we're looking. Oh, I think we're getting
We're over.
close. We're getting close to our. Because I try to think of it like a class, right?
Yeah.
50 minutes, the students' eyes start to glaze over a little bit.
Yep.
The
yeah.
human brain can only do so much.
Yeah, well, good.
But I thank you for coming today. I was so excited to talk to you about the Folsoms and our connection. And would you consider coming back? If I think of it like a specific topic comes up and I think, oh, you'd be the one to talk about it.
Sure.
That would be great.
Good.
Thanks so much.
Great.
So thank you for the 6th episode of Take Me Back the Interviews. And this has been a fun one. I've enjoyed it a lot. Thank you.
Well, I'm sure you enjoy every one of them.